The champagne flute felt foreign in my calloused hands as I watched my wife of 12 years introduce me to her corporate friends like I was some kind of charity case she'd picked up at a bus stop. "This is Eddie, my roommate," Mara said with that practiced smile she'd perfected during her climb up the corporate ladder at Pinnacle Tech Solutions. The word roommate hung in the air like a bad smell, and I could see the confusion ripple across the faces of her colleagues at the monthly company mixer. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Eddie Forrest, 42 years old, owner of Forrest Construction, a small but successful business I'd built from nothing after 15 years swinging hammers for other people. My hands are scarred from honest work, my back aches most mornings, and I drive a pickup truck that's seen better decades. But I'm nobody's charity case, and I sure as hell wasn't anybody's roommate. "Roommate?" asked Julia Chen, Mara's assistant and apparent best friend, her perfectly manicured eyebrows arching toward her designer hairline. "That's interesting." Mara laughed, that tinkling sound she'd practiced until it sounded natural. "Well, you know how it is. We're more like housemates, really. Eddie has his projects, I have mine." She gestured vaguely in my direction, while her eyes searched the crowd for someone more important to talk to. The venue was the Riverside Country Club, the kind of place where my work boots would leave scuff marks on marble floors that cost more than most people's cars. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over women in dresses that could pay my crew for a week, and men in suits that probably cost more than my truck's monthly payment. I should have seen this coming. The signs had been there for months, Mara working late more often, her phone constantly buzzing with urgent messages, the way she'd started looking at me like I was a piece of furniture she was considering replacing. "So, Eddie," said a tall man in an expensive suit who'd appeared at Mara's elbow like smoke, "what kind of work do you do?" Before I could answer, Mara jumped in. "Oh, Eddie's in construction. Very hands-on work." The way she said it made it sound like I cleaned sewers for a living. "Lance Bishop," the man said, extending a soft hand that had never held anything heavier than a golf club. "I'm in wealth management. I help people make their money work for them." "Eddie Forrest," I replied, giving his hand a firm shake that made him wince slightly. "I help people build things that last." Lance's smile was the kind you'd see on a shark right before it bit you. How practical. I watched as he positioned himself between Mara and me, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that was far too familiar for someone she'd supposedly just met. Mara didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned into it slightly, her body language screaming intimacy to anyone paying attention. "Lance has been helping me with some investment strategies," Mara explained, but she was looking at him when she said it, not me. "He's been absolutely invaluable." "I'll bet he has," I thought, watching the way they looked at each other. There was a chemistry there that had nothing to do with financial planning and everything to do with the kind of planning that happened behind closed doors. "Excuse me," I said, setting my untouched champagne on a nearby table. "I need some air." I walked out onto the club's terrace, where the October wind carried the smell of the Penobscot River and the distant sound of traffic from the city below. Castleton, Maine wasn't exactly New York, but it had its charms, if you weren't being humiliated by your wife at a fancy party. Through the glass doors, I could see Mara holding court with her work friends, Lance never more than a few inches from her side. She was animated, laughing, touching his arm when she made a point. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. My phone buzzed. A text from Big Mike, my crew chief. "How's the fancy party, boss? You wearing a tuxedo?" I typed back, "Might as well be wearing a Target." The response came quickly. "That bad?" "Worse, I'll tell you tomorrow." I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket and stared out at the river. 12 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. Being introduced as a roommate, while my wife flirted openly with some slick financial advisor who probably couldn't change a tire if his life depended on it. The terrace door opened behind me, and I heard the click of high heels on stone. "There you are," Mara said, but she didn't sound concerned. She sounded annoyed. "People are asking where you went." "I doubt that," I said without turning around. "Don't be dramatic, Eddie. It's just a work thing." "Is that what we're calling it?" She moved to stand beside me at the railing, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, something new and expensive that I hadn't bought her. "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned to look at her then, really look at her. Mara was still beautiful at 38, with the kind of polished elegance that came from expensive salons and designer clothes. But there was something cold in her green eyes now, something calculating that hadn't been there when we'd met 15 years ago. "It means your roommate is going home," I said. "You can catch a ride with Lance. I'm sure he won't mind." Her face flushed, but not with embarrassment, with anger. "You're being ridiculous. Lance is a colleague." "Right. And I'm the King of England. Eddie, don't make a scene." "I'm not making anything, Mara. I'm just calling it like I see it." I started to walk away, but her voice stopped me. "If you leave now, don't expect me to come running after you." I turned back one more time, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something that might have been regret flicker across her face, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "I stopped expecting that a long time ago," I said. I walked back through the party, past the curious stares and whispered conversations, past Lance's smug smile and Julia's barely concealed glee at the drama unfolding. At the coat check, I handed over my ticket and waited while a teenage girl in a black uniform retrieved my old leather jacket, the one Mara had been trying to get me to throw away for years. As I walked to my truck in the parking lot, I could see Mara through the club's windows, already back in conversation with Lance, her hand on his arm, her head thrown back in laughter. She'd moved on from our argument in less than 5 minutes. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine running, heat blasting against the October chill. My phone buzzed with a text from Mara. "Don't wait up." I deleted it without responding and drove home to the house we'd bought together 7 years ago, the one I'd renovated with my own hands, turning a run-down Victorian into something beautiful. The house where I was, apparently, now just a roommate. But as I pulled into our driveway, a thought occurred to me. If Mara wanted to play games, I could play games too. And I'd been building things and solving problems a lot longer than she'd been climbing corporate ladders. The front porch light cast long shadows across the lawn as I walked to the door, and for the first time all evening, I found myself smiling. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mara's car pulling into the driveway at 6:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 5, sitting in my workshop in the basement, drinking coffee and thinking about roommates. The front door opened and closed with the careful quietness of someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. Her heels clicked across the hardwood floors I'd refinished 2 summers ago, then stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I could picture her standing there, probably holding those expensive shoes in her hand, debating whether to come down and face me or just slip upstairs to shower and pretend nothing had happened. She chose option 2. I heard the shower start up 20 minutes later, followed by the familiar sounds of Mara getting ready for work, the hairdryer, the closet door opening and closing, the careful application of makeup that took exactly 37 minutes every morning. I knew her routine better than she probably realized. By the time she came downstairs, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the local newspaper, looking for all the world like a man who'd slept peacefully through the night. "Morning," she said, her voice carefully neutral as she moved to the coffee maker. "Morning, roommate," I replied, without looking up from the sports section. Her hand froze on the coffee pot handle. "Eddie, about last night. What about it?" You were just introducing me accurately, right? We live in the same house, we split some bills, we're basically roommates who used to sleep together. She turned around, coffee mug in hand, and I could see she'd chosen her outfit carefully. A navy blue dress that was professional but flattering, paired with the pearl necklace I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. Armor for whatever battle she thought was coming. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Do I? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were making it pretty clear that you're single and available. I never said I was single. You didn't have to. Body language speaks louder than words, Mara. Especially when you're practically wrapped around Lance, what's his name? Lance Bishop, and we were just talking. Right. The way teenagers just talk at the prom. She set her coffee mug down harder than necessary. You're being paranoid. Am I? Then you won't mind if I ask you a few questions. Such as? I folded the newspaper and looked at her directly. Such as, where were you until almost 7 this morning? I went out with some people from work after the party. We were just unwinding. Until 7 a.m.? Time got away from us. Where? What do you mean, where? Where did you go to unwind until 7 in the morning? The Riverside Club closes at midnight. Most of the bars in town close at 2. I watched her face carefully, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize over 12 years of marriage. The slight tightening around her eyes when she was calculating, the way she touched her neck when she was about to lie. Her hand went to her throat. We went to Lance's place. He has a nice apartment downtown, and we were just talking about work stuff, investment strategies. Until 7 a.m. It was a group thing, Eddie. Julia was there and Mark from accounting and Sarah from HR. We were all just hanging out. The lies came so smoothly, I almost admired the craftsmanship. But I'd been married to her long enough to know when she was spinning fiction. What did you talk about? These investment strategies? I don't remember all the details. It was just general stuff about portfolio diversification and market trends. Market trends? At 3 in the morning. Why are you interrogating me like I'm a criminal? I'm not interrogating you. I'm just curious about my roommate's social life. She flinched at the word roommate like I'd slapped her. Eddie, I know you're upset about how I introduced you last night, but you have to understand. Understand what? These are important people. My career depends on making good impressions, and sometimes it's easier to keep things simple. Simple, like pretending you're not married. I didn't pretend anything. I just didn't make a big deal about our relationship status. Our relationship status. Is that what we're calling 12 years of marriage now? She looked at her watch. A new one I didn't recognize. Something expensive with a thin gold band. I have to go to work. We can talk about this tonight. Sure. If you're planning to come home tonight, maybe you should text me and let me know. You know, roommate courtesy. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then stopped and turned back. Eddie, I know you're hurt, but you're blowing this out of proportion. Nothing happened last night. I believe you, I said, which was true. I believed nothing had happened last night. But something had definitely been happening for a while now, and last night was just the first time she'd been careless enough to let me see it. After she left, I sat in the kitchen for another hour, thinking about investment strategies and market trends and the way Lance Bishop's hand had found the small of my wife's back like it belonged there. Then I went down to my workshop and started making some plans of my own. The first thing I did was call Big Mike. Forrest Construction, Mike speaking. It's me. Can you handle the Morrison job today without me? Sure, boss. Everything okay? You sound like somebody stole your lunch money. Something like that. I need to take care of some personal business. The fancy party didn't go well? Let's just say I learned some interesting things about my living situation. Want to talk about it over a beer later? Yeah. Meet me at Murphy's around 6. You got it, boss. I hung up and looked around my workshop. I'd built it myself when we bought the house, turning the basement into a combination office and woodworking space. The walls were lined with tools I'd collected over 20 years, saws and sanders and measuring devices, everything organized and maintained with the kind of care that comes from depending on your tools for your livelihood. But it wasn't the tools I was interested in this morning. It was the filing cabinet in the corner, where I kept all our important papers, insurance documents, tax returns, bank statements, mortgage papers. The boring stuff that Mara had been happy to let me handle while she focused on her career. I pulled out the folder marked credit cards and started going through the statements from the past 6 months. Mara had her own card for work expenses, but we also had a joint account that we both used for personal purchases. What I found was interesting. Dinner for two at Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in town. $247.83 on a Tuesday night in August. I'd been working late on the Henderson renovation that night, hadn't gotten home until almost 10. A weekend at the Samoset Resort down in Rockland. $147, $22 for 2 nights in September. Mara had told me she was going to a work conference. When I'd asked her about it, she'd said it was boring and she didn't want to talk about work stuff at home. Flowers from petals and stems. $89.50. Delivered to our house on a Thursday afternoon when I was at work. When I'd gotten home that day, there were no flowers anywhere. Wine from vintage selections. $156.73 for a bottle of something French that I'd never seen in our house. And then there were the charges I didn't recognize. Payments to something called Beacon Property Management. 3 payments of $200 each over the past 3 months. I got out my laptop and did a quick Google search. Beacon Property Management handled luxury apartment rentals in downtown Castleton, the kind of place where a wealth management consultant might keep a nice apartment for entertaining clients. Or roommates. I printed out the credit card statements and highlighted the suspicious charges, then put everything in a new folder marked Investment Strategies. Then I got dressed and drove downtown to do a little reconnaissance. Beacon Property Management had an office on Exchange Street in one of the renovated brick buildings that had been converted from old warehouses into trendy commercial space. The kind of place that charged premium rent for exposed brick walls and industrial lighting. I parked across the street and watched the building for a while, trying to figure out the best approach. I could walk in and ask questions, but that might tip off whoever was paying attention. Or I could try a more indirect approach. I chose indirect. The coffee shop next door to Beacon was called Grind, and it was exactly the kind of place you'd expect in a gentrified downtown district. Reclaimed wood tables, chalkboard menus, and baristas with carefully cultivated facial hair. But it also had a clear view of the Beacon office, and more importantly, it was the kind of place where people talked. I ordered a black coffee and a blueberry muffin, and found a table by the window. "You're not from around here," said the barista when he brought my order. He was maybe 25 with the kind of beard that took serious commitment and a man bun that defied several laws of physics. "What makes you say that?" "The work boots. Most of our customers are either office workers or trust fund kids playing artist. You look like you actually work for a living." "Guilty as charged. I'm in construction." "Cool. I'm thinking about getting into that myself. This coffee thing is just temporary while I figure out my life. It's good work if you don't mind getting dirty and you can handle the physical demands. Better than making lattes for people who spend more on coffee than I make in a day." He nodded toward the window, where a woman in a designer suit was climbing out of a BMW. "See that lady? She comes in here every morning, orders a triple shot macchiato with oat milk and 2 pumps of vanilla syrup, then complains that it's too hot, every single day." I looked where he was pointing and felt my stomach drop. The woman was Julia Chen, Mara's assistant and best friend, and she was walking straight toward the Beacon Property Management office. "Friend of yours?" the barista asked, noticing my expression. "Something like that," I said, watching as Julia disappeared through the glass doors of the property management office. She was inside for exactly 11 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying a small envelope and looking around nervously, like she was worried about being seen. I waited until she drove away, then finished my coffee and walked across the street. The Beacon office was all glass and chrome, with the kind of modern furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. A receptionist with perfect teeth and a practiced smile looked up as I entered. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about rental properties downtown. Something upscale but not too big. Maybe a one-bedroom?" "Certainly. Are you looking for something long-term or short-term?" "Long-term. I'm recently separated, looking for a fresh start." Her smile became more genuine, tinged with sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. Divorce is never easy." "Not divorced yet. Still working through the details." "Well, we have several lovely properties that might work for you. What's your budget range?" "Around $1,200 a month, give or take." Her fingers flew over her keyboard. "I have a few options in that range. There's a beautiful one-bedroom on Harbor View that just came available. Very private, great views of the water." "Harbor View? That sounds familiar. I think a friend of mine mentioned that building." "Oh, really? We have several clients there. It's a very popular building." "Lance Bishop. He said he really liked living there." Her expression didn't change, but I caught the slight pause before she responded. "I'm not sure I can discuss other tenants, but I'd be happy to show you the available unit if you're interested." "That would be great. When would be a good time?" "I could show it to you this afternoon if you'd like. Say, around 2? "Perfect." I gave her my name and phone number, then walked back to my truck with a lot more information than I'd had an hour ago. Lance Bishop had an apartment on Harbor View, and Mara had been paying for it. Murphy's Tavern was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find in a blue-collar town like Castleton. Dim lighting, scarred wooden tables, and the lingering smell of fried food and spilled beer. It was also the kind of place where a man could think without being bothered by anyone who didn't belong there. Big Mike was already waiting when I arrived at 6, his massive frame hunched over a pint of Guinness at our usual table in the back corner. Mike Sullivan was 6'4" and built like a brick wall, with hands that could crush walnuts and a heart that was surprisingly gentle for a man who looked like he could bench press a small car. "You look like hell, boss," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "Feel worse than I look." "That bad, huh? What happened at the fancy party?" I signaled the waitress for a beer and gave Mike the condensed version of the previous night's events, along with what I'd discovered that morning. By the time I finished, Mike was shaking his head and muttering under his breath. "So, she's been playing house with this Lance character on your dime?" "Looks that way." "And she introduced you as her roommate?" "In front of about 50 people. Jesus, Eddie, that's cold even for her." Mike had never been Mara's biggest fan. He thought she was pretentious and materialistic, and he'd never understood what I saw in her. But he'd always been polite about it, at least to my face. "The question is, what do I do about it?" "You could confront her, lay out all the evidence and demand an explanation." "I could, but then she'd just deny everything, and I'd be back where I started, except now she'd know I was onto her." "You could hire a private investigator, get some real proof." "Maybe, but that takes time and money, and there's no guarantee it would hold up in court anyway." "Court? Divorce court. This marriage is over, Mike. Has been for a while, I think. I was just too stubborn to admit it." Mike took a long pull of his beer and studied my face. "You sure about that? 12 years is a long time to throw away." "I'm not throwing anything away. She already did that when she decided to start playing house with Lance." "So what's the plan?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was the plan? I'd spent the afternoon walking around downtown Castleton, thinking about my options. I could play the wounded husband, beg her to come back, promise to change. I could get angry, make threats, demand she choose between me and Lance. I could hire a lawyer and try to take her for everything she was worth in a messy divorce. Or I could do something else entirely. "She wants to play games," I said finally. "So we'll play games." What kind of games? The kind where I make the rules. Mike leaned forward, interested despite himself. I'm listening. She introduced me as her roommate, right? So that's what I'll be, the perfect roommate. I don't follow. Think about it. What do roommates do? They split expenses. They respect each other's privacy. They don't get involved in each other's personal lives. They're polite, but distant. And they don't cover for each other when things go wrong. I pulled out my phone and showed Mike the photos I'd taken of the credit card statements. She's been spending our money on her boyfriend for months. Dinners, hotel rooms, rent for his apartment, probably thousands of dollars. That's theft. Not technically. She's an authorized user on the account. But it's definitely fraud if she's been claiming these as business expenses on her taxes. Mike's eyes lit up with understanding. And if her company found out she was using business accounts for personal expenses, she'd be fired, possibly prosecuted. That's playing pretty rough, boss. She started this game, Mike. I'm just going to finish it. We spent the next hour working out the details. Mike knew people. Guys who worked construction had connections all over town. Electricians who worked on office buildings. Plumbers who fixed problems in fancy apartments. Delivery drivers who saw things they weren't supposed to see. By the time we finished our second round of beers, I had a plan that would have made Sun Tzu proud. You sure about this? Mike asked as we got ready to leave. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. I'm sure. She made her choice when she decided I was just a roommate. All right then. What do you need me to do? For now, just keep your ears open. If anyone on the crew hears anything about Mara or Lance, I want to know about it. You got it, boss. I drove home through the quiet streets of Castleton, past the houses where normal married couples were probably sitting down to dinner together, talking about their days, making plans for the weekend. The life I'd thought I had until 24 hours ago. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Mara's car wasn't there, which wasn't surprising. She was probably having another late-night strategy session with Lance. I let myself in and went straight to my workshop, where I fired up my computer and started doing research. If I was going to play this game, I needed to understand all the rules. Lance Bishop, it turned out, was quite the entrepreneur. His wealth management firm, Bishop Financial Services, had been in business for 3 years and claimed to specialize in aggressive growth strategies for discerning clients. His website featured a professional headshot that made him look like a cross between a male model and a Fortune 500 CEO. But when I dug deeper, things got more interesting. Bishop Financial Services had been the subject of several complaints with the Better Business Bureau, mostly from clients who claimed Lance had made unauthorized trades with their money. Nothing that had resulted in criminal charges, but enough to suggest that Lance's business practices were questionable at best. More interesting was what I found when I cross-referenced Lance's business address with property records. Bishop Financial Services was listed as operating out of a virtual office space, basically a mail drop with a fancy address. Lance didn't actually have a real office, which meant he was probably conducting most of his business out of that apartment Mara was paying for. I printed out everything I'd found and added it to my growing file on Lance Bishop. Then I opened a new document on my computer and started typing. Roommate agreement, I wrote at the top. It took me 2 hours to draft, but when I was finished, I had a document that would have made any lawyer proud. It covered everything from household expenses to privacy expectations to guest policies. It was reasonable, fair, and completely designed to make Mara's life as uncomfortable as possible while staying within the bounds of the law. The key was the guest policy. According to my new roommate agreement, any guest who stayed more than 2 nights in a 7-day period would be considered a long-term visitor and would be required to contribute to household expenses. Any guest who used the house for business purposes would be required to pay a fee equivalent to office rent, and all guests would be required to submit to a background check. I printed out 2 copies of the agreement and left them on the kitchen table, along with a note that said, Since we're roommates now, I thought we should make things official. Please review and sign at your convenience. Eddie. Then I went upstairs to the master bedroom and started packing. It took me about an hour to move my clothes and personal items to the guest room down the hall. I stripped the bed and took my pillows with me, leaving behind only Mara's things and the furniture we'd bought together. In the guest room, I set up my laptop on the small desk by the window and plugged in my phone charger. It wasn't as comfortable as the master bedroom, but it would do for now. Besides, roommates didn't share bedrooms. I was just finishing up when I heard Mara's car in the driveway. It was almost midnight. I listened as she came through the front door, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She paused in the kitchen, probably reading my note. Then I heard her footsteps on the stairs. The master bedroom door opened and closed. A few minutes later, it opened again, and I heard her walking down the hall toward the guest room. She knocked softly on the door. "Eddie, can we talk?" "Door's open," I called out. She stepped into the room, still wearing the navy dress from that morning, but looking decidedly less put together. Her hair was mussed, her makeup smudged, and there was something in her expression that might have been uncertainty. "What's all this about?" she asked, holding up the roommate agreement. "Just trying to formalize our new living arrangement. You said we were roommates, so I figured we should have some ground rules." "This is ridiculous, Eddie. We're married." "Are we? Because last night you introduced me to 50 people as your roommate. This morning you stayed out until 7 a.m. with another man. Tonight you didn't come home until midnight, and you smell like cologne that isn't mine." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. "The agreement is pretty straightforward," I continued. "We split household expenses 50-50. We respect each other's privacy. We don't interfere in each other's personal lives, basic roommate stuff. And if I don't sign it, then I guess you'll need to find somewhere else to live. The house is in my name, remember? You insisted on that for tax purposes." It was true. When we'd bought the house, Mara had been worried about how joint ownership might affect her credit rating if my business ever ran into trouble. So we'd put everything in my name, with her listed as a beneficiary on my life insurance policy. At the time, I'd thought it was a smart financial move. Now I realized it was the best decision I'd ever made. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. You want to act single? You can be single, but you're going to do it by my rules." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating, trying to figure out her options, trying to determine how much leverage she had. The answer, I knew, was not much. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Take all the time you need, but until you sign the agreement, I'm treating you like any other tenant, which means you owe me $600 for this month's rent." $600? Half the mortgage payment, plus utilities. I'll have an itemized bill for you tomorrow. She turned and walked out without another word, closing the door behind her with a little more force than necessary. I lay in the narrow guest room bed, listening to the sounds of her moving around in the master bedroom, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. Tomorrow, the real games would begin. I woke up at 5:30, same as always, and went downstairs to make coffee. Mara's copy of the roommate agreement was still on the kitchen table, unsigned. Her car keys were gone, along with her purse and laptop bag. She'd left early to avoid another conversation. I was okay with that. I had work to do. The first call I made was to Tommy Ricci, an electrician who'd worked with my crew on several projects. Tommy was good at his job, but more importantly for my purposes, he was also good at gathering information. "Eddie, how's it going, man?" "Can't complain. Listen, Tommy, I need a favor." "Sure, what's up?" "You still doing work in those fancy downtown apartments?" "Yeah, I'm actually working in the Harbor View building this week. Some kind of electrical upgrade in the penthouse units." "Perfect. Keep your eyes and ears open, would you? I'm particularly interested in apartment 4B. 4B? That's one of the units I'm working on today, actually. Nice place. Guy who lives there has expensive taste. Guy with slicked back hair? Drives a BMW? That's the one. Seems like kind of a douche, if you ask me. Why? You know him? We've met. Just curious about his living situation. I'll see what I can find out. The second call was to Rita Morrison, who tended bar at 3 different establishments around town and knew more gossip than the local newspaper. Rita and I had gone to high school together, and she'd always been good for information when I needed it. "Eddie Forrest, you old dog. What can I do for you?" "Hey, Rita, I was wondering if you could help me with something." "Depends what it is. You're not asking me to spy on that wife of yours, are you?" "Why would you think that?" "Because she was in here last night with some smooth-talking pretty boy, and they weren't discussing the weather." My grip tightened on the phone. "Which bar?" "The Anchor. They were tucked away in that corner booth, real cozy-like. She kept looking around like she was worried about being seen." "What time?" "They came in around 9, left around 11. He paid the tab with a credit card, tipped well." She looked guilty as sin. "Thanks, Rita. I owe you one." "You don't owe me nothing, honey, but you might want to think about what you're going to do with this information." I already knew what I was going to do with it. I spent the morning at the Morrison job site, trying to focus on work while my mind churned through possibilities. We were renovating a 1920s colonial for a young couple with more money than sense, and the project was running smoothly enough that I could afford to be distracted. Around noon, Tommy called back. "Eddie, you're going to want to hear this." "I'm listening." "So I'm working in 4B, right? And this Lance guy comes home around lunchtime with some woman. Not your wife, by the way. Different woman entirely." "What did she look like?" "Blonde, maybe 30, dressed real professional. They went into the bedroom and closed the door, if you know what I mean." "How long were they there?" "About an hour. When they came out, she was fixing her hair and he was tucking in his shirt. Real subtle, these two." "Did you get a name?" "I heard him call her Jennifer, and when she left, I saw her get into a car with dealer plates. Looked like she might work at one of those fancy car lots downtown." Jennifer. I made a mental note to do some research on local car dealerships. "Anything else?" "Yeah, actually. While they were busy, I had a chance to look around the apartment. This guy's got expensive taste, but he's not paying for it himself." "What do you mean?" "I mean, everything in that place is top shelf, but the guy's got collection notices piled up on his kitchen counter. Credit card bills, loan payments, even a notice from the IRS. This Lance character is living way beyond his means." "Interesting. What about the apartment itself?" "Lease agreement was sitting on the counter. Monthly rent is $1,200, but it's not in his name." "Whose name?" "Some company called Pinnacle Tech Solutions. Mara's company. They were paying Lance's rent directly." "Tommy, you're a lifesaver." "Just returning a favor, man. You helped me out when I was going through my divorce. Least I can do." After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, processing what I'd learned. Lance was cheating on Mara while she was cheating on me with him. Mara's company was paying his rent, which meant she was probably funneling money to him through fraudulent expense reports. And Lance was in serious financial trouble despite his expensive lifestyle. It was like a house of cards built on quicksand. I drove home around 4, planning to grab a shower and something to eat before my next phase of reconnaissance. But when I pulled into the driveway, I saw Mara's car already there, along with 2 others I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I could see people moving around in my living room. I walked through the front door to find Mara, Julia Chen, and 2 other women I didn't recognize sitting around my coffee table with wine glasses and what looked like legal documents spread out in front of them. "Eddie," Mara said, her voice artificially bright. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet my friends." She gestured to the 2 women I didn't know. One was a sharp-faced brunette in an expensive suit, the other a younger blonde who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. "This is Amanda Richardson, my attorney," Mara continued, "and this is Sarah Mitchell from HR." I nodded politely but didn't move from the doorway. Ladies? Amanda Richardson looked me up and down like she was appraising livestock. Mr. Forrest, I presume. Mara's told me so much about you. I'll bet she has. We were just discussing Mara's situation. What situation would that be? Mara stood up, wine glass in hand, and I could see she'd had more than one drink. The situation where my roommate is trying to extort money from me. Extort? Amanda Richardson held up a copy of my roommate agreement. This document you presented to my client is essentially an ultimatum. Sign this or face eviction. That's textbook extortion. I walked into the room and sat down in my favorite chair, the one I'd inherited from my grandfather. Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it? I'd call it a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. Mara introduced me to her colleagues as her roommate. I'm simply trying to formalize that arrangement. Sarah Mitchell, the HR woman, leaned forward. Mr. Forrest, I think there may be some misunderstanding here. Mara never intended. With respect, Ms. Mitchell, you weren't there. I heard what she said. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're under pressure, Amanda Richardson interjected. Social situations can be stressful. I'm sure they can be, especially when you're trying to juggle a husband and a boyfriend at the same party. The room went dead silent. Julia Chen's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Sarah Mitchell's eyes went wide. Amanda Richardson's expression didn't change, but I saw her hand move toward her briefcase. Mara's face went white, then red. That's completely untrue. Is it? Because I have credit card statements that suggest otherwise. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of the statements, then handed the phone to Amanda Richardson. Dinner for two at Chez Laurent, weekend at the Samoset Resort, rent payments to Beacon Property Management, all charged to our joint account, all on dates when Mara was supposedly working late or attending conferences. Amanda Richardson studied the phone screen, her expression growing more serious with each photo. These could be legitimate business expenses, she said finally, but her tone had lost some of its confidence. Could be. But I doubt the IRS would see it that way, especially if they found out that Mara's company was also paying rent on an apartment where she was conducting personal business. Sarah Mitchell's face had gone pale. What apartment? Lance Bishop's apartment on Harbor View. $1,200 a month, paid directly by Pinnacle Tech Solutions. I'm sure your accounting department has records. How do you know about that? Mara demanded. I know a lot of things, Mara. For instance, I know that Lance had another woman in that apartment today around noon. Blonde, drives a car with dealer plates, answers to Jennifer. Mara's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor, red wine spreading like blood across the boards I'd refinished with my own hands. Julia Chen stood up abruptly. I think maybe we should go. Good idea, I said. This is getting a little too personal for a business meeting. Amanda Richardson gathered up her papers and snapped her briefcase shut. Mr. Forrest, if you're planning to use any of this information in a divorce proceeding... Who said anything about divorce? I'm just a roommate, remember? Roommates don't get divorced. Sarah Mitchell was already heading for the door, her face grim. I had a feeling Mara was going to have some uncomfortable conversations at work in the very near future. After the others left, Mara and I stood in the living room, looking at each other across the broken glass and spilled wine. You bastard, she said quietly. I'm the bastard? I'm not the one who's been stealing money to pay for my boyfriend's apartment. I never stole anything. What would you call it? Those were legitimate business expenses. Business expenses for what? Sleeping with Lance? She slapped me then, hard enough to snap my head to the side and leave a ringing in my ears. I touched my cheek and looked at her calmly. Feel better? You have no right to humiliate me in front of my friends. Your friends? Is that what we're calling your lawyer and HR director now? They were trying to help me. Help you what? Figure out how to screw me over in a divorce? Help me figure out how to save our marriage." "Our marriage?" I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Mara, our marriage ended the moment you decided Lance Bishop was more important than the man you promised to love and honor. It was never supposed to go this far." "What was never supposed to go this far? The lying, the cheating, the stealing?" "It's not stealing." "Then what is it?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. For the first time since I'd known her, Mara Forrest was speechless. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to sign my roommate agreement. You're going to start paying your share of the household expenses, and you're going to stop using our joint accounts to fund your boyfriend's lifestyle." "And if I don't?" "Then you're going to find yourself explaining to a lot of people why you've been committing fraud, starting with your boss and ending with the district attorney." "You wouldn't." "Try me." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. Finally, she walked over to the kitchen table, picked up a pen, and signed the roommate agreement. "There. Happy now?" "Getting there." She threw the pen down and headed for the stairs. "I'm going to take a shower." "Good idea. You smell like guilt and cheap cologne." She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to me. "This isn't over, Eddie." "No," I agreed. "It's not. But the next move is yours." After she went upstairs, I got a dustpan and broom and cleaned up the broken glass and spilled wine. As I worked, I thought about what had just happened. I'd won this round, but the game was far from over. Mara was smart and resourceful, and now she knew I was onto her. She'd be more careful from now on, which meant I'd have to be more creative. But that was okay. I'd been building things and solving problems my whole life, and I was just getting started. 3 weeks after the confrontation in my living room, I was sitting in my truck outside the Pinnacle Tech Solutions building at 5:47 p.m., watching employees stream out of the glass and steel structure like ants from a disturbed hill. I'd been doing surveillance for the better part of a month now, learning patterns, taking notes, building a comprehensive picture of my wife's professional life. What I'd discovered was fascinating. Mara left work every day at exactly 5:45 p.m., but she didn't come home until after 8 p.m. She spent those 2 hours and 15 minutes somewhere else, doing something that required her to change clothes and reapply her makeup before returning to our house. Today, I was going to find out where. At 5:44, I saw her emerge from the building, talking animatedly on her phone. She'd changed her hair since our confrontation. Shorter, more sophisticated, the kind of cut that cost $300 and required monthly maintenance. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, paired with black heels that added 3 inches to her height. She looked good, confident, like a woman who thought she was winning. She got into her car and pulled out of the parking garage. I followed at a distance, staying 3 cars back, using techniques I'd learned from a private investigator I'd hired briefly during my first marriage. That relationship had ended badly too, but at least my first wife had been honest about wanting out. Mara drove through downtown Castleton, past the Harbor View apartments where Lance lived, past the restaurants and bars where she'd been conducting her affair. She turned onto Elm Street, then into the parking lot of the Riverside Country Club. The same place where she'd introduced me as her roommate 4 weeks ago. I parked across the street and watched as she walked into the club like she owned it. Through the large windows, I could see her greeting people, hugging and air-kissing her way through a crowd that looked like a who's who of Castleton's professional elite. My phone buzzed, a text from Big Mike. "Package delivered." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks, Phase 2 is go." I drove home and spent the evening in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on a project I'd been working on for the past 3 weeks. It was a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, made from cherry wood with brass hinges and a lock that I'd crafted myself. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were copies of every piece of evidence I'd gathered about Mara's activities. Credit card statements, bank records, photos of her entering and leaving Lance's apartment, receipts from restaurants and hotels, phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts to Lance's number, and most damaging of all, copies of expense reports she'd filed with Pinnacle Tech Solutions, claiming personal expenses as business costs. It was enough evidence to end her career and possibly send her to prison, but I wasn't planning to use it. Not yet. At 8:17 p.m., I heard Mara's car in the driveway. She came through the front door, humming something under her breath, sounding happier than she'd been in weeks. "Eddie," she called out, "are you home?" "Down here," I replied from the workshop. She appeared at the top of the stairs, still wearing the red dress, but now carrying her heels in one hand. "What are you working on down there?" "Just a little project. How was your day?" "Good. Really good, actually. I had drinks with some colleagues after work. We were celebrating." "Celebrating what?" She smiled, and there was something predatory about it. "I got a promotion, Senior Director of Human Resources. It comes with a substantial raise and a corner office." "Congratulations. I'm sure Lance will be thrilled." Her smile faltered slightly. "This has nothing to do with Lance, doesn't it? Because I'm betting your new position gives you access to a lot more company resources. Bigger expense accounts, more discretionary spending, less oversight. You're paranoid, Eddie." "Am I? Or am I just paying attention?" She came down the stairs, moving carefully in her stocking feet. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know you, Mara. Better than you think I do. And I know that everything you do has an angle." She reached the bottom of the stairs and looked around my workshop, taking in the tools and equipment, the filing cabinets, and computer setup. Her eyes lingered on the wooden box sitting on my workbench. "What's in the box?" "Insurance." "Insurance against what?" "Against you." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're being dramatic again." "Am I?" "Let me ask you something, Mara. How long did you think you could keep this up?" "Keep what up?" "The lying, the cheating, the stealing. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" "I don't know what you're talking about." I opened the wooden box and pulled out a manila folder. "Dinner at Chez Laurent on August 15th. You told me you were working late on the Henderson account. But the Henderson account was closed in July." I pulled out another folder. "Weekend at the Samoset Resort in September. You said it was a work conference. But there was no conference that weekend. I checked." Another folder. "Rent payments to Beacon Property Management. $1,200 a month for Lance's apartment. Paid through your company's accounts as temporary housing for visiting consultants." Her face had gone pale. "How did you get that information?" "I have friends, Mara. People who see things, hear things, people who know how to ask the right questions." "You had me followed." "I had you investigated. There's a difference." She sat down heavily on the bottom step of the stairs. "What do you want?" "What do I want? That's an interesting question." I closed the folders and put them back in the box, then locked it with the brass key. A month ago, I wanted my wife back. I wanted us to work through our problems like adults. I wanted to save our marriage. And now I want justice. Justice! You humiliated me, Mara. In front of 50 people, you reduced me to a roommate. You made me look like a fool. Eddie, I'm sorry about that, I really am. I was drunk, and I wasn't thinking clearly. Sorry doesn't fix it. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. She stood up and moved closer to me, and for a moment I caught a whiff of her perfume mixed with wine and cigarette smoke. What if I ended it with Lance? What if I came home and we tried to work things out? It's too late for that. It's never too late. We love each other, Eddie. We've been together for 12 years. You love Lance. You've made that pretty clear. Lance is a mistake, a midlife crisis or something. But you and I, we have history. We have a life together. We had a life together, past tense. She reached out and touched my arm. Please, Eddie, don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built. I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that. So what happens now? I looked at her standing there in her expensive dress, with her perfect hair and makeup, looking every inch the successful corporate executive. But I could see the fear in her eyes now, the realization that she'd miscalculated badly. Now you get to find out what it feels like to lose everything. What does that mean? It means your friends at Pinnacle Tech are going to be very interested in the contents of this box, especially Sarah Mitchell from HR. You wouldn't. Watch me. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Eddie, please. If this comes out, I'll lose my job. I could go to prison. Should have thought of that before you decided to commit fraud. It's not fraud. Those were legitimate business expenses. Tell it to the FBI. The FBI? Corporate fraud is a federal crime, Mara, especially when it involves amounts over $10,000. I pulled out my phone and showed her a calculator app. $1,200 a month for Lance's apartment times 6 months. That's $7,200. Add in the dinners, the hotels, the other expenses, and we're looking at close to $15,000. You're bluffing. Am I? Want to find out? She let go of my arm and stepped back, her face cycling through a range of emotions: fear, anger, desperation, calculation. What do you want? She asked finally. I want you to understand what you've done. To me, to us, to yourself. I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I think you still believe you can charm your way out of this, apologize and make promises, and go back to the way things were. Can't I? No, Mara, you can't. Because this isn't just about the affair. It's about the lying, the stealing, the complete lack of respect for our marriage and for me as a person. So what happens now? Now you get to choose. Choose what? I walked over to my computer and opened a document I'd been working on for the past week. Option 1. You resign from Pinnacle Tech tomorrow morning. You move out of this house by the end of the week. You agree to a quiet, uncontested divorce where you get nothing except your personal belongings and whatever money you had before we got married. And option 2? Option 2. I send copies of everything in that box to your boss, your company's board of directors, the IRS, and the FBI. You get fired, prosecuted, and probably sent to prison. And you still get divorced and lose everything. She stared at the computer screen, reading the document I'd prepared. This is extortion. No. This is consequences. You made choices, Mara. Now you get to live with them. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. And if I choose option 1, what happens to Lance? Lance is not my problem, but I suspect that when Pinnacle Tech starts investigating their expense accounts, they're going to find some very interesting discrepancies. She nodded slowly, understanding the full scope of what was happening. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I'm good at solving problems. It's what I do for a living. She turned and walked back up the stairs, moving like a woman who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. At the top of the stairs, she stopped and looked back at me. I did love you, Eddie. Once. I know, I said. That's what makes this so sad. After she went upstairs, I sat in my workshop for another hour, thinking about choices and consequences and the way 12 years of marriage could unravel in a matter of weeks. At 11:30 p.m., I heard her car start up and drive away. She didn't come home that night. The next morning at 8:47 a.m., I was sitting in the parking lot of Pinnacle Tech Solutions, watching employees arrive for another day of corporate warfare. I'd been there since 7, nursing a cup of coffee from the drive-thru and waiting to see if Mara would show up. She did, at 8:52, driving slowly and carefully, like someone who'd been up all night drinking. She parked in her reserved space near the building's entrance, then sat in her car for several minutes, talking on her phone. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone rang. Eddie? Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. I'm listening. I choose option 1. Smart choice. I'll submit my resignation this morning. I'll be out of the house by Friday. Good. Eddie? What? I really am sorry about all of it. I know you are, Mara, but sorry doesn't fix anything. Will you at least try to remember the good times before everything went wrong? I watched her through the windshield of her car, seeing her shoulders shake as she cried. I'll remember, I said, but I'll remember all of it, the good and the bad. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the parking lot for another hour, watching the building where my wife was ending her career and probably destroying Lance Bishop's in the process. Around 10:30, I saw Lance's BMW pull into the parking garage at high speed. He emerged from the elevator 5 minutes later, looking panicked and disheveled. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Ricci. Package delivered to building management. Lance is being evicted, effective immediately. I smiled and typed back, "Thanks for everything." Then I drove home to wait. Mara arrived at the house around noon, carrying a cardboard box and looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Her eyes were red from crying, her makeup was smudged, and her perfect hair was a mess. "It's done," she said as she walked through the front door. I resigned. Lance was fired. They're conducting a full audit of the HR department's expenses. What did you tell them? The truth, that I'd made some poor personal decisions and compromised the company's integrity. I took full responsibility. What about Lance? What about him? Did you warn him? She laughed bitterly. Warn him about what? That his meal ticket was about to disappear? That his sugar mama was about to lose her job? So it's over between you two? It was over the moment I realized what kind of man he really is. She set the cardboard box on the kitchen table and started pulling out personal items from her office. A coffee mug, some framed photos, a small plant that was already wilting. He tried to blame everything on me, she continued. Said I'd seduced him, that I'd forced him to accept the money. He actually suggested that I was some kind of predator who'd taken advantage of his financial situation. Classy guy. I was such an idiot, Eddie. Such a complete fool. Yes, you were. She looked up at me, surprised by my bluntness. But being a fool isn't a crime, I continued. Being a thief is. I know, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. Yes, you will. She finished unpacking the box and looked around the kitchen like she was seeing it for the first time. I'll start packing my things tonight. I should be out by Thursday. Where will you go? My sister's place in Portland, at least until I can figure out what comes next. What about money? I have some savings. Not much, but enough to get by for a few months while I look for work. It might be hard to find another job in HR. Word gets around in professional circles. I know. I'll probably have to start over in a different field. She walked over to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where we'd hosted barbecues and birthday parties, where we'd talked about planting a garden and maybe getting a dog someday. Do you hate me? She asked without turning around. No, I said, and I realized I meant it. I don't hate you, Mara. I'm disappointed in you. I'm angry at what you did, but I don't hate you. That's something, I guess. It's more than you deserve. She turned around to face me. Will you ever be able to forgive me? Maybe. Someday. But not today. That's fair. We stood there in the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd argued about bills and made plans for the future, where we'd kissed and laughed and lived as husband and wife for 12 years. I should get started on the packing, she said finally. Mara? Yes? For what it's worth, I hope you figure things out. I hope you find a way to be happy. Thank you. That means more than you know. She went upstairs, and I heard her moving around in the master bedroom, opening drawers and closets, beginning the process of dismantling our shared life. I went down to my workshop and opened the wooden box one more time, looking at all the evidence I'd gathered. all the proof of betrayal and fraud and broken promises. Then I closed it and put it away in my filing cabinet. I wouldn't need it anymore. Over the next 3 days, I watched my wife pack up 12 years of marriage into boxes and suitcases. She worked methodically, dividing our possessions with the same attention to detail she'd once brought to her job. She took her clothes, her books, her jewelry, and half of the wedding gifts we'd received from friends and family who'd believed we'd be together forever. She left behind the furniture we'd bought together, the dishes we'd eaten off, the bed we'd shared. She left behind the photos on the walls and the memories embedded in every room of the house. On Thursday evening, she loaded the last box into her car and walked through the house one final time, saying goodbye to the life she'd chosen to throw away. "I guess this is it," she said, standing in the front doorway with her keys in her hand. "I guess it is." "Eddie?" "What?" "I know you'll never believe this, but I really did love you. I still do. I believe you. That's what makes this so tragic. Will you be okay, living here alone?" "I'll be fine. I was alone before I met you. I can be alone again." "That's not the same thing." "No, it's not. But it's what I have now." She nodded and walked to her car. She put her suitcase in the trunk, then got behind the wheel and started the engine. I watched from the doorway as she backed out of the driveway and drove away down the street where we'd lived as neighbors and lovers and husband and wife. When her taillights disappeared around the corner, I went back inside and closed the door. The house felt different now, emptier but also cleaner, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. I walked through the rooms, noting the spaces where her things had been, the gaps on shelves and walls where her presence had once filled every corner. In the kitchen, I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter, looking out at the backyard where autumn leaves were beginning to fall. Tomorrow, I'd rake them up and bag them for collection. Next week, I'd start winterizing the house, checking the furnace and sealing the windows against the cold that was coming. I'd get through the winter, and then spring would come, and I'd figure out what came next. My phone rang. It was Big Mike. "Hey boss, how you doing?" "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually." "Good to hear. Listen, I was wondering if you wanted to grab a beer tonight. Rita's got a new bartender at Murphy's, some kid from Boston who thinks he knows how to make fancy cocktails." "Sounds terrible. I'll be there in an hour." "You got it, boss." I hung up and looked around my empty house one more time. Then I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean, carrying the smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves. The streetlights were just coming on, casting warm pools of light along the sidewalk where I'd walked with Mara on summer evenings, talking about our days and making plans for tomorrow. But that was then, and this was now. I got in my truck and drove toward Murphy's Tavern, where my friends were waiting, and the beer was cold, and nobody cared about corporate politics or investment strategies or the complicated mathematics of betrayal. As I drove through the quiet streets of Castleton, I thought about choices and consequences, about the difference between justice and revenge, about the price of trust and the cost of rebuilding a life from scratch. Mara had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. She'd lost her job, her marriage, her home, and her future, all for a man who'd abandoned her the moment things got difficult. It wasn't the revenge I'd originally planned, but it was justice of a sort. She'd gambled everything on Lance Bishop and lost it all, just like I'd lost everything when she'd decided I was nothing more than a roommate. But unlike her, I still had my integrity. I still had my business, my friends, my self-respect. I still had a future, even if it wasn't the one I'd planned. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. I parked outside Murphy's Tavern and sat for a moment, listening to the sound of laughter and conversation drifting through the windows. Inside, people were telling stories and sharing drinks and living their lives without drama or deception. It sounded like exactly where I belonged. I got out of my truck and walked toward the door, leaving the past behind and stepping into whatever came next.